Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the FTA Thought Leadership webinar series. This is indeed the second topic of this webinar series on migrant workers in Turkey, top 3 issues identified in the supply chain. My name is Natasha Hassing, and I'm a membership officer here at FTA. Now, before we dive into the context of this webinar, just a couple of logistics I want to go through. As I go through each one of these points, as an audio check, if you could type into the chat function whether you can hear me all right, that would be great. Just so everyone is aware, everyone is muted. This is a 1-hour-long webinar, and the Q&A will be at the end of the webinar. Therefore, through the toolbar on the right-hand side of your screen, there is a questions feature where you can type in and submit your questions throughout the webinar. We will then address these questions at the end of the webinar during the Q&A. Okay, I've just checked everyone's responses here, and it sounds like everyone can hear me all right and the audio is okay, so we will move forward. One last point I want to mention is that you can follow us on social media, and here are our various hashtags that can be used on Twitter. So any comments, questions, or special quotes throughout the webinar today that you want to share, please do so using these hashtags. Just a quick overview of the agenda. Following myself, I am pleased to invite Yakut Oktay. She's an auditing coordinator here at FTA, and she will be able to provide the business context and share some of FTA's actions so far. Following Yakut, I'm very pleased to invite Muge Tuna. She's a social compliance expert in Turkey and therefore can provide on-the-ground experiences and challenges that she sees today. After Muge, I invite Maren Barthel, the CSR manager of Otto Group. Otto Group is a company sourcing directly from Turkey, and therefore Maren will be able to provide more personal insight and the challenges at company level. Following Maren, I'm delighted to introduce Darrell, the Senior Director of Sustainability here at FTA, and through his expertise and knowledge will address the global trends and implications of migration. Therefore, as you can see, the objective today is to provide a full scope on this topic, providing insights, personal experiences, and expert knowledge on the topic from all various different angles. We will then open it up to a discussion and Q&A session, and then myself, Natasha Hassing, a membership officer here at FTA, will be doing the wrap-up and closing. So as we move on to the context, as mentioned, Yakut Oktay will be providing the business case and context. She is a Turkish citizen, 5 years of CSR experience, which has provided her with hands-on expertise with production facilities in the EMEA region. She also has coordinated legal aspects, communications, and procedures regarding migrant workers in Turkey particularly. So without further ado, I will now pass it over to Yakut.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Natasha. So my role in this webinar will be mostly about facts and figures, really. So let's start. As you can see on the screen, at the moment, as of May 2016, it has been reported that there are about 2,750,000 Syrian refugees in Turkey. 273,000 of these are living in camps, as far as we know, which means 90% of them are living outside the camps. The Turkish government has set 10 camps, which you can see on the screen, which are based on the southeast areas of Turkey. And after the legislation on work permits and the protection of foreigners, there have been 8,000 work permits issued by the government as of May 2016 again. So as far as BSCI participants go, we know that Turkey is prominent for the textile industry. In the BSCI database, we have 1,108 producers to date that produce textiles in Turkey. And from these producers, we have 322 BSCI participants that are sourcing directly, which compose 17.4% of our total participants, which creates a huge impact on their reputation and a risk for their supply chain, which needs to be monitored and mapped. The last point would be the actions to date that have been taken by the government and from the FTA side. As you may already know, on the 15th of January 2016, the Turkish government has issued a temporary protection regulation for all the foreigners, for all the refugees that are in the country. This includes Syrian workers as well as other migrants under temporary protection. In March 2016, we have received the implementation and work permit application guide, which are practical guides for all the migrants in the country, especially Syrian refugees in the country, to apply for a work permit and how they can be employed and how they can apply for jobs. From the FTA side, we have been monitoring the let's say, crisis closely since its beginning. And in 2015, we have organized a roundtable meeting in Istanbul specifically focusing on the Syrian migrant worker issue, how we can stop any exploitation, how we can mitigate, how we can prevent. And following that, we have started taking actions in the region as well. There has been a guidance leaflet that was developed by the FLA, the Fair Labour Association, and the Ministry of Labour in Turkey jointly, and FTA has provided financial support to this document. This document has been distributed to all the refugees in the camps in Turkey, the ones that we have showed you just in the, I think, 2 slides ago. We have also translated the implementation guide that was provided by the government for our members into English so that they can provide some guidance to their producers, because if our members do not understand the requirements, it's hard for them to help the producers. That's our philosophy. We also provide ad hoc assistance to members on a day-to-day basis. Whenever a member contacts us about about any issue and question that they may have about the workers in their supply chain, we try to assist them with our team in Brussels and any stakeholder on the field. The very latest document is the guidance document for our members and their producers, which is still in drafting, but it has taken a very good shape for the time being. The guidance document was initially drafted by the Secretariat, and then we have conducted a consultation and brainstorming session during our Sustainability Day, which used to be called the annual conference. During this brainstorming and consultation session, we have received very valuable feedback from the field, from our members, from different stakeholders, and after the conference, we have integrated these this feedback into the document, and now this document is sent to different level of stakeholders for consultation. And once the consultation is done, it will be published, and it's a quite fast-paced process. So in the upcoming weeks, you'll be seeing a document from our side. Yeah. So this is a very brief introduction to the background, and I think Muge and Maren will be able to provide you with very in-depth analyses of the situation from their perspective.
Great. Thank you, Yakut, for laying the foundation of this topic with some relevant facts and figures for moving forward. Here's just a quick reminder to all of the audience that any questions or queries that have come up, to please submit them through the questions tab in the toolbox. All right, thank you, everyone. So we're moving on now next to the next topic of the practitioner insight. I am delighted to invite Muge Tuna on board. She's a subject matter specialist and has worked for several years in a textile factory focusing on social compliance and increasing productivity. She's provided consultancy and trainings for local NGOs in Turkey over the past 4 years. So without further ado, I now introduce Muge Tuna to introduce her topic, providing some on-the-ground experiences and knowledge.
Thank you, Natasha. In my presentation, there will be 2 parts. First of all, one of it will be current status, and the other part will be about challenges in terms of Syrian migrant workers. As Yakut has already mentioned about some figures, we see that those figures should really be taken into consideration while taking the steps. As I said, I will talk about the current status first of all, and in this context, I will talk about the residence permit, work permit, and regulation and guidance document. Regarding residence permit, the implementation is selected in Turkey. When the Syrian workers Syrian refugees access to Turkey with their passport, which means, legally, then they can apply to City Migration Administration in all cities. And only in Istanbul they can apply to police department, and they get their ID card beginning with 98. With this card they can benefit from, for example, emergency services in all hospitals, and in a month after they receive their real ID card beginning with 99, they obtain legal residence permit, and it means they can benefit from all medical health care in hospitals. In this regard, a question may come to your mind here, like what if a Syrian doesn't have a passport and access to Turkey, illegally? Then they are placed in camps, and their status are considered as a guest by government of Turkey. So at the border, the Gendarmerie or Turkish Land Forces or AFAD, which means Turkish an emergency management agency, help them to regularize their status and place them in camps. The second slide, please, Natasha. When it comes to work permit, the minister, actually Yakut has already mentioned about it, but I will give the details. The ministry has published a regulation on work permit for foreigners under temporary protection in January 2016. If you have a residence permit as a Syrian worker, 6 months later, you or your employer on behalf of you can apply for work permit. I have checked the situation with some of the producers to learn the process duration, for example, in Istanbul and Gaziantep, and all the producers said that they can easily get a work permit in 1 week or maximum 3 weeks after the regulation has been published. And the next slide, please. After the regulation, again, the Ministry of Labor and Social Security has published 2 types of guidance. Here you see the guidance. One of its guidance document on work permit application for Syrians under temporary protection, which is placed at the left top of the slide. It includes, for example, terms of implementation, application methods, and evaluation by the ministries, the content of exemption documents. By the way, I will explain what it means later. And the limitation also I will explain in the challenging slide. And also vocational training is being included in this guidance document. The second one is, which is placed at the right bottom of the slide, is about guidance document on web-based application system. It guides the employers on how to register the workers online. It's more visual and screenshots are available, so it's really very easy to understand and interpret it. By the way, I would like to explain the exemption document. The there's an exemption for the workers who will work in agriculture and livestock husbandry jobs in Turkey. When they apply to the provincial directorate with the protection ID card beginning with 99, they are given the exemption document in agricultural jobs, so they can easily work without work permit. Yes, these were the general information about current studies in Turkey. When it comes to challenges, Natasha, next slide, please. Yes, I will mention about 3 issues. One of is about limitation, the second one is working illegally, and the last one is education. Regarding limitation, as you see, the number of migrant workers shouldn't exceed 10% of Turkish citizens working in the same workplace. But on the other hand, if any employer who employs no Turkish citizens or less than 10 employees, then you can employ maximum 1 foreigner Syrian worker, and you can apply for a work permit for him or her. And on the other hand, within the 4 weeks, for example, if any employer couldn't find any Turkish citizen worker who has the equal skills with the others, then this quota, this employment quota, which is 10%, can be increased, but with the, of course with the evaluation of the ministries. And there's also a province limitation for the foreigners. The application, for example, the workers can apply to the province where the foreigner is given the permit to stay. It's also valid for the workers who will work in agricultural jobs. This is the first challenge. Next slide, please, Natasha. And when it comes to civic shops, since many factories or companies export and are being regularly audited, they don't dare to employ Syrians illegally. But in civic shops where there is no exportation or in subcontractors where not much monitoring mechanism is placed, we see some problems, such as the workers working without work permits, and they are subjected to discriminatory treatment. For example, they are paid under legal minimum wage. They work excessive hours, and also they work overtime and are not paid overtime wages. Of course, they don't have an access to social security and legally mandated benefits. And we also see the Syrian refugee children in the street shops and in subcontractors, which where the monitoring mechanism are not placed. And the next. And regarding education, since the Syrian workers working in factories and or companies don't know Turkish well as a Turkish citizens, of course, they are having difficulties in understanding or communication with their colleagues. So it makes them difficult to engage to workplace implementations, and they are feeling left out. But Yakut has already mentioned about the leaflet. In order to solve this problem, the Ministry of Labor and Social Security prepared leaflets that include worker social rights, as you see at the left of the slide, left bottom of the slide. It's both in Turkish and Arabic, and the Ministry of Labor has distributed them to the migrants in the provincial directorates. Yes, and these were the challenging. Have you got any question about it? Because that's all on my side.
Thank you, Muge, for your presentation and for sharing some of the current case studies that you see today in Turkey, and especially the 3 main issues that you identified of limitation, education, and informal workers, and potential exploitation of those workers as well. Here's just a quick reminder for the audience that any questions that might be coming up, please do submit them through the questions format in the toolbar. However, this now brings us to our next topic of what can companies do, and this is in line with us trying to provide a full objective or full scope on this topic, providing both the practitioner insight and now the business insight. And here I am delighted to invite Maren Barthel from the Otto group to present on what can companies do. Maren is responsible for CSR and the implementation of Otto Group's social program in sourcing countries. She has spent many years working in key sourcing countries that are currently facing migrant worker challenges, such as Turkey and China. And Maren is also the vice chair of the BSCI steering committee. So without further ado, I hand it over to Maren.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm not sure whether I can provide you with any best practices, as Natasha announced in her introduction words in the very beginning of the webinar, but I would like to share some of our experience that we have with this topic. I think one of the big issues is the question of identification. When we look back to the BSCI survey that was conducted in 2015, there were 95% of the producers that stated that they are not employing Syrian refugees. 95% of the producers. 51% of the BSCI participants stated that they have no transparency about their supply chain. Our own investigations and also the investigations done and surveys from other organizations, like, for example, the London Institute for Business and Human Rights or the ORSAM study of 2014, definitely speak a different language because they have identified Syrian refugees as one of the major challenges in the Turkish textile and garment supply chains, and not only textile and garment. When we look at audits, it's going to be very difficult to identify this problem via audits. Most of the producers, I would say, at least the first-tier producers, are pretty well aware of the legal frameworks. So if you have fully announced audits, it will be most likely pretty hard to identify any illegal workers because they are not there on that day. So what needs to be done is rather to study the audit reports and draw relevant conclusions from them. Just an example, it's not allowed in Turkey to have cash payment, but if you see in an audit report that there is a non-compliance because wages have been paid in cash, you should be alerted and dig deeper into this issue. We also think that it can be identified by close cooperations with vendors and factories. If you have a trustful, relationship with them, you will and may find out because they will tell you about it. Also, unannounced and semi-announced audits and visits, not necessarily only audits, but factory visits when you, for example, go for quality issues or quality checks or production examinations. It's always good to keep your ears and eyes open. So, and the third point is that we in Otto also identified this issue through our qualification program, where there were very good relationship between the facilitator of the program and the factories, and we got to know a lot of these issues via these programs. So the conclusion for us as the Otto Group is, yes, we are affected. I would even make a very bold statement, having lived in Turkey for more than 6 years and just returned end of last year, so I got a lot of insight on the Syrian influx. I would say that not only we, but we all and you all are most likely affected by Syrians in the supply chain. With a very careful estimation we would say maybe 15 to 25% of our producers employed Syrian refugees in 2015 and 2016. That's mainly related to the first year, and it's going to be difficult to make good estimations for the subcontractors or second and third tier. I mean, you all are aware of the structures in Turkey with the small ateliers and the structures that are very complex, more complex than in many other countries. From those that we identified, none of them, as far as we know, and we are just under checking again, was employed under the new 10% rule that Muge and Yakut mentioned earlier. However, they all received equal payment. Next slide, please. What are the challenges? I don't want to give you a list of challenges because that would be pretty long. I think there are lots of challenges to deal with the problem, but the main challenge, I believe, is really finding the right balance. And we just have to be aware and make ourselves aware over and over again that we really face a humanitarian disaster of unprecedented scale. And we are not talking about numbers here. We are talking about fates. We are talking about people who are severely affected, who lost everything, who are in a status of no acceptance, basically, and who are highly vulnerable. Muge has elaborated on that. That starts with payments when they are employed, but if they are not employed, they are also very vulnerable, and when they are employed, they are also vulnerable because the social compliance point that we use for workers in factories are not applied to these illegal workers in many cases. So that is a very big challenge because they are highly vulnerable, and a company definitely needs to act with due diligence to reduce and mitigate the risk of their exploitation in the supply chain. On the other hand, we are operating in a very tight frame, and Muge has gone into detail with regard to the ICAMET, the residence permit. I can tell you I had an ICAMET starting with 98, the residence permit with 98, and it was very, very difficult to get it. And I had a full-fledged office behind who did all the bureaucracy things for me. So it is a very challenging situation. The working permits were not given to the refugees before January 2016 at all. And again, now Turkey is hosting 2.75 million Syrian refugees, but in January there were 2.5 already. So 2.5 million and no working permits. The new labor law, and Muge also elaborated on that, was sort of meant to solve the situation, but I think in reality very little has changed, because this labor law doesn't give the Syrians the blanket right to work, but it only allows those with contracts to apply for work permits. And for most of the people, this is really not a realistic prospect. As said before, this law is given only under very special conditions. For example, you must be registered, okay, but then also you have to enjoy the temporary protection status, and to get the temporary protection status as such is already pretty difficult. The employer then needs to do the application process, and it's very complicated. If you find the time and just flip through the guidelines, it's really very difficult to understand. It's a legal document, and it's very complicated. And the employer has to prove that he cannot find an equivalent worker from Turkey who can fill in this job. So definitely there is no incentive for a factory owner or a producer to use this 10% quota, even if they are in good spirit and with good intentions. I believe it's very complicated, and they are not really encouraged to do that. And the other point that I really want to strengthen is, I think and that comes back to the gap or the sandwich position that we are in. On the one side, to act with due diligence and protect these people that are in a crisis. On the other side, to act within the legal framework. I think that we should not see the employment of Syrian refugees as an inherent risk that must be avoided by all means. Because if we are doing that, we might only drive them further into illegality. What is the word? Sorry. Into illegal circumstances. So, I think the strict prohibition of employment will just encourage further illegal action, and will most likely further deteriorate the situation of this group, which is very vulnerable anyway. So I think in this challenge situation, it's a pragmatic approach that must be applied, or that we are trying to apply. So how do we proceed? Next slide, please. First of all, acknowledge the situation. I mentioned that before. It is a humanitarian crisis, and we are not talking about numbers. We are talking about people who have lost everything. So I think we also need to always remind ourselves that we have to protect the dignity of these refugees and of these workers. So, of course, acting within the policy framework, I think we need to have a policy. The policy which gives applicable rules for the producers, which is, of course, based on the BSCI Code of Conduct. And just as a small reminder, we have the principle of no precarious employment in it, so that covers it very well. If you want to go to a bigger framework, then take the Sustainable Development Goals and read through number 8, sub-goal number 8.8. So I think in this policy, it's important to have the commitment not to illegally employ Syrian refugees. Also, of course, to have no child labor and no bonded and forced labor accepted. We believe that also a focus should be put on recruitment practices of brokers and recruitment agencies. There are quite a few mafia techniques around when it comes to refugees and migrant workers, and I think a policy should also cover that point. The second thing is, of course, communication, and I have to say that in the Otto group, we did the second step before we did the first one. We communicated at a pretty early stage, I think the first time in 2012, to all our producers. We also try to focus on the due diligence and on mindset. That is for our company and for our producers alike. And I think it's a very important point to make that the BSCI 2.0, it's really much more about mindset and about systems and not about pure compliance. So we think that a factory with, for example, a C rating in an audit, but which has a very good mindset and has an open mindset, can be of much more use than a compliant A or B rated, compliant in brackets, B rated factory with a mindset which does not fulfill the requirements that we hope it has. So, and the last point is, because I see I'm running out of time, is also stakeholder cooperation. We have room for improvement here as well. We do cooperate with stakeholders, but probably more can be done. But it should be, we are currently exploring different ways, and we are in contact, for example, with the United Nations in Turkey, also with Hayata Tech, which is a local NGO, which is working with Syrian refugees. So I think that is also one point that can help to address this issue. And last but not least, I think it is really important as a company that we act with humanity and protect the dignity of these people in our supply chain. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Maren, for sharing a more personal insight of what challenges Otto Group is facing and how you're actually taking action on that, despite maybe some of the legal actions that are also being done there locally in Turkey. So I think this brings us on nicely to to wrap up the presentation side of the webinar on the global trends of migration. And here I would like to introduce Darrell, the Senior Sustainability Director of FTA. Since 2015, Darrell has led FTA Sustainability Division, which is comprised of the Business Social Compliance Initiative, BSCI, and the Environmental Performance Initiative, BEPI. So these two initiatives help member companies manage their supply chain risks and drive sustainability performance. Previously, Darrell has worked as a global EHS and global social compliance director for Avery Dennison, where he was then located in Hong Kong. And through his extensive experience in global social compliance, he will now address the global trends and implications of migrant workers on a global scale.
All right. Sorry about that. Had some technical difficulties on my side. So Natasha, thank you very much for the introduction, and everyone on the webinar. So thank you for your attention. I just have a few slides to go over, and so what I wanted to do is, I think we've received a lot of great information from a range of different folks on the specifics of the issues with migrant workers in Syria. And what I want to do is I want to address the fact that this is there's a global trend, and I think there's more elements coming. So I wanted to take this time to kind of go in a slightly larger direction. So the UNHCR came out with a report earlier this week that indicated that 1 in every 122 people is either displaced, a refugee, or asylum seeker as of 2015 or as of 2016. And we think that this is a trend that unfortunately we see there's no decrease going forward. So what I've done is taken the opportunity to go through and indicated where we see changes in refugee population since 2014 according to the UNHCR. So as you can see, Europe substantial increases, Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Americas, it's a widespread issue. And so as this trend is growing, we think there's substantial impacts for companies as we go forward. And we want to make sure to kind of talk about what the short-term trends are and what maybe the medium-term trends are. So as we move on to the next slide, we've taken the opportunity to kind of talk about the global implications. So overall, we think that there's going to be tremendous growth in migrant plus refugee workers, and so we think that the population is growing faster than the overall population in general. So we're going to see that impacts on businesses, specifically businesses of BSCI members in sourcing countries, is going to be greatly affected. We know that employers and recruiters are playing a significant role in protecting and assisting migrant workers, and I think Muge's experience on the ground in Turkey really proves that working collaboratively we wind up with a much bigger benefit. And as we think about kind of the Sustainable Development Goals, how those link into kind of the broader BSCI philosophy, the non-discrimination is a persistent challenge and one that I think we don't have a perfect solution to, but as our tools come together and as that work comes together, we think we'll be able to provide much clearer guidance to BSCI members. In the short term, what we're seeing is that unfortunately, as this issue grows, we're going to start to see new countries added to the mix, places where we may not have believed we had a lot of problems. So China, for example, has migrants from Tibet, of course, as we're all very familiar with kind of in the West, but additionally we're seeing an increase in North Korean workers in China. And so while this is pretty common in facing states where China interacts with North Korea, in fact what we're seeing is that in the coming further south we're seeing more North Korean workers, so just as an example. The other element that we see in the short term is that more women migrants than men. And so from a worker's perspective, as we think about non-discrimination in the workplace, as we think about women's role in the supply chain, which as we all know is a critical path to success in a factory, we want to make sure that they have as much protection as the law allows. And what can we do in terms of auditing and capacity building and helping our producers to understand that critical element. And there's another kind of uncomfortable discussion, which is that half of migrants are children. And so what we're seeing is that children in this particular context is so actual children and then juveniles as well. So it's kind of put into a larger group. And so as we start to protect the working rights of juveniles, for example, we want to make sure that the laws under which we're operating are in fact aligned with ILO conventions, that we're aligned with BSCI code of conduct, and we're aligned with the expectations of our members. So the challenges don't shrink, unfortunately, they grow. And as the more you dig in, the more challenges there are. As if that wasn't enough, in the medium and long term, we're going to see that, again, we're going to start to see massive displacement, likely because of climate change, as we start thinking about Bangladesh. Bangladesh, what is it, the average height above the sea level in Bangladesh is 1 meter. So most of the country, in the event of significant climate change events, is going to require mass migration out of Bangladesh. So that's something that we're going to be looking into as well. We know that from the development agenda, both from multilateral institutions and from European institutions as well as individual countries, we know that migration is going to rise on their development agenda. And so we want to make sure to provide the tools, the policies, all of the work so that our members are ready as their governments start to move in this direction, that our members are actually able to be in front of that trend. And we know that it's going to change the skill set within production countries as new folks enter the marketplaces and enter the production stream. What we're going to see is the skill sets within those countries are going to change, and so as a result, the capacity building within the factory setting is going to be vastly more important than it's been in the past. So with those new skills, there's going to be advantages, and at the same time there's going to be skill gaps. So another place where BSCI is going to be working with producers to kind of close those gaps and ensure production in a way that we all agree is the direction we want to go forward in a sustainable way. So what are we doing about it? So in this last slide you can see, and I think you've heard a lot from Maren and her experiences. I think you've gotten a lot from Muge. I think we've had some fantastic elements that we've seen work that's currently going on, and I wanted to give everyone an idea of some of the things that Anisha has in the pipeline. So what are we doing to help you? So we've got a guidance document on Syrian migrants in Turkey that Anisha has pulled together by working with Muge and other stakeholders, kind of people that we know in country, people that we know at multilateral institutions. That's been drafted. It's in very good shape, and it's been sent over to stakeholders for consultation. So the idea here is that we want to make sure to bring our members the best of all possible information. So it was a good document, but we want to make sure to get other folks involved. So we sent it out to a group of stakeholders for their consultation. So as that finishes up, and as we refine that document and get it all pulled together, what we'll do is that'll start to be distributed out to our members, I think both through the members area on our website as well as through the national contact group coordinators and chairs. So you'll start to see that through the traditional elements and your contact points with BSCI. And I would encourage anyone on the webinar that in the event you've got further questions, there's obviously during the webinar we can put the questions as Natasha's put forward, but I would also suggest we've got some feedback systems that you can send us questions about this or anything else, and we can answer those questions for you. So with that, I'd like to stop here and then hand it back over to Natasha for any questions.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Darrell, for sharing your valuable input and insight on the global trends and where FTA stands in this regard. On that note, I do realize that we are coming short on time in regards to the 1 hour time frame of this webinar. We have received some very intriguing and interesting questions, so we will proceed with the webinar and run a little bit over time to ensure that we answer some of those. For those of you who are on time constraints and do have to leave, we apologize for that, but we will be following up with some questions that were not answered, and of course we'll be providing you with some communication after this webinar if you want to follow up separately with anything that was not addressed during the time of this webinar. So we now are moving on to the open Q&A session. I will be handing this off to my colleague Yakut, who will be assisting with some of the moderating of the questions. So we will now be moving forward with that. Just bear with us one moment, please.
Thank you, Natasha. Okay, so we have received really multiple questions. Okay. So the very first question that we have is the information for migrants only available in print, or is there a telephone hotline as well? And do most migrants have cell phones so that a hotline might be helpful? Muge, would you like to reply to this question? The second question we have is on the part of challenges. In which case or from which point on time onwards will Syrian refugees be able to benefit from Turkish social security? Apologies. Could you explain the 10% rule? Could you explain again what the 10% rule refers to? Apparently there were some technical issues when you explained it, and we have received a question again. There's a question from Maren. Can you elaborate the policy for recruitment? Any practices to share?
Yeah, I think for the recruitment practice, you really need to give very clear guidelines to the producers. Actually, most of it is covered in the BSCI Code of Conduct and the terms of implementation, so which stipulates very clearly the rules and regulations for employment. What we informed our producers in addition is that they have to take special care with regard to the recruitment of via brokers and agents, because there can be a pretty big gap, and that also has to be made clear that if they employ people via agents and brokers, that they make sure that once they enter the factory, they're completely responsible for them. That means if they say, oh, I didn't know that the person was only 14 years old because the broker said he's 16 or 18, it's still within their responsibility. So recruitment practices should make very clear that they have age requirements and so on. With regard to legal employment, of course, the recruitment, the official version must say they can only employ under the 10% rule, and this is also what we communicate, because we cannot encourage our producers to break the law, and if they employ Syrians which are not under the 10% rule, they are illegally, and we cannot officially encourage them to do that.
Thank you, Maren. Why so late with the guidance? We are definitely not ahead in Turkey.
Just got unmuted for a second. So the question was, why so late?
Why so late?
All right, that's a fair question. And I think what we've got is that we have a lot of issues on the table. There's really no excuse for us to be late, but as we work on a number of issues globally, I mean, again, we've got members in 43 countries and we've got a lot of open issues to work on. I would also argue that it's not too late because we still have Syrian workers in Turkey that need protection. So I would argue that this is current. So yes, did we get off to a late start? Sure, I would suggest that's probably right. But again, the issue still is a problem. And we're bringing tools to the table, so I'm not sure that it's too late.
Thank you. I believe this may also be one of your questions, Darrell. Could you elaborate which or what kind of stakeholders are consulted for the pre-audit questionnaire? Or maybe, Anisha, would you like to?
Yes. Can you hear me? Yeah. It's actually different types of stakeholders, members, a few selected members, as well as rights organizations, as well as organizations such as Save the Children, who are focusing on child labor issues. So it's a mix, really. And we hope to get their feedback by early next week. And then we will be pulling the report, finalizing it, and sending it out.
So the question is temporary protection permit valid for all cities of Turkey, or is it valid only for the cities allowed by government for Syrian residents?
All right, excellent. So once again, apologies for going over time, but I think we've had some fruitful discussions here on this topic with some excellent questions coming in, both from members and some stakeholders that have been involved as well here today. So I hope as an audience you feel you've gained some valuable insight from the various perspectives, both trying to tackle practitioner view, but also company level insight, as well as some of our expertise internally here at FTA. On that note, I do want to mention that some of the questions that maybe weren't answered, or for those of you who had to leave, well, not early, but on time, in fact, we will be following up with those questions that were not addressed. We will also be having a recording of this webinar and the slides, which will be shared in the coming days as well. So on a concluding remark, please stay tuned to the FTA's Thought Leadership Series. As mentioned in the beginning, this was indeed our second webinar in this series, so we do have 4 more coming. So please stay tuned on those topics to ensure that we continue a fruitful discussion on all of these hot topics in our supply chains. So on behalf of the FTA, I do want to thank Muge, Tuna, and Maren Barthel for joining in this webinar and discussions. And then, of course, thank you very much, Yakut, and thank you very much, Darrell, for also sharing your valuable input and insights. And thank you to the audience again for taking part and sharing your wonderful questions and thoughts as well. On that note, I conclude the webinar. Thank you.